Why homosexual unions are not marriages. Today, homosexual activists are demanding the legalization of same-sex marriage. In some places they have even achieved this goal. They assert that this is a matter of equality. If heterosexuals can marry people of the opposite sex, they argue, then equality demands that homosexuals be allowed to marry people of the same sex. Many people found this argument compelling. Others have no objection to the idea of homosexual marriage. Both of these are grave signs. They reveal just how much damage the institution of marriage has already suffered. Opponents of homosexual marriage argue that if marriage were redefined to include same-sex couples, then both marriage and families would suffer great damage. That is quite true, but marriage has already been greatly damaged. Or else, the idea that two people of the same sex could marry each other wouldn't even be under discussion. The fact that it is shows that a large segment of the public does not understand the basics of marriage. They have forgotten or even never knew what marriage is. Fantasy versus reality. In recent years, several movements have been successful framing their causes in terms of equality. The civil rights movement involved the idea of racial equality. The women's liberation movement involved the idea of sexual equality. Now, homosexual activists are using a similar strategy, claiming that equality requires that homosexuals be allowed to marry each other. For that to be true, there would have to be real equality between homosexuality and heterosexuality. The way there is real equality between persons of different races and between men and women. But there is no equality between a marriage and a union involving two persons of the same sex. They are fundamentally different things. And pretending that they are the same is indulging in fantasy. It's time to face reality. What marriage is. Marriage is a union of a man and a woman that is oriented toward the good of the spouses and the protection and education of offspring. No other kind of union is a marriage. Marriage is unique. Since before recorded history, men and women have united to take care of each other and to bring up children. That happens in every culture, no matter where in the world. In fact, a culture would die without those unions of men and women. Marriage is thus a human, universal, an institution that is built into human nature and that manifests itself in all societies. This has important implications. As we will see, society is not denying marriage to homosexuals. Instead, homosexual activists are asking society to redefine marriage so that the term applies to things that are not in fact marriage. Why two men or two women can't marry each other. People of the same sex cannot marry each other because any union between them would not have the reality that marriage possesses. This is particularly obvious when it comes to procreation. Two women or two men cannot procreate. For new children to be brought into the world, biology requires the union of a man and a woman. But procreation is not the only issue. Men and women are different in ways that go way beyond reproduction, both physically and psychologically. They complement and complete each other in a manner that two people of the same sex do not. These differences play an important role in raising children by setting examples of true fatherhood and motherhood. A husband and a wife provide the kind of environment that helps children grow and develop properly. Even apart from procreation and raising children, as in the case of marriages which do not result in children due to infertility, the physical and psychological difference between men and women enables them to unite and thrive in a way two people of the same sex cannot. In all of these cases, and especially in the case of procreation, it is clear from nature that man and woman are designed to be united with each other. Two men or two women are not. For this reason, same-sex unions do not possess the reality of marriage, and it's simply a fiction to call them marriages. Why societies recognize marriages? Some ask why society should sanction marriage at all. Isn't it the couple's business and nobody else's? In fact, it is in society's interest to recognize marriage, and that is why societies all over the world throughout history have done so. The reason why is obvious. In order to survive and prosper, societies need new members. They constantly lose members, whether through illness, accident, war, crime, or simply old age. One way or another, at some point, every single member of a society will die. And if these deaths are not offset by births, then the society itself will die. Marriage, by its very nature, is the institution that brings new human beings into the world and raises them to be productive members of society. If a society wants to survive and prosper, then it is in its interest to recognize and help marriage in a special way. Where marriages and families are threatened, society is threatened. And where marriages and families are strong, society is strong. Why society shouldn't pretend homosexual unions are marriages? Society should not treat homosexual unions as marriages because they are not marriages. Such unions are incapable, by their very nature, of producing children. The parties do not complement each other the way that a man and a woman do. A homosexual union is fundamentally different thing than a marriage. It isn't a question of whether society should allow homosexual marriage. It can't. No one can. The question is whether society will pretend that homosexual marriages exist. Will the state engage in a society-wide fantasy that ignores the basic facts about men and women? It should not. It must not, because to indulge in delusional thinking about the basic realities of human life can only damage society in profound and permanent ways. Delusional thinking harms society. When a country bases its policies on false premises, society suffers. It does not matter what the policy is. If its army misjudges the enemy's position, it may suffer a crushing defeat. If its economic policy is out of touch with reality, hard times will result. And if a state becomes delusional about the nature of men and women, disaster is bound to follow. People have a tendency to think that if something is legal, it must be right. So the mere fact that a state's law pretends that homosexual unions are marriages would mislead the public on a vast scale, causing millions of people to become deluded about the nature of marriage. This would be a further blow to marriage. Beyond those it has already suffered from easy divorce, out of wedlock births, abortion, and contraception. Any children being brought up by homosexual parents would also be harmed. Whether the children were acquired by adoption or through a previous heterosexual union, they would be raised with a false view of human sexuality and a defective set of moral values, as well as being denied the example of proper fatherhood and motherhood. The friends and relatives of those in such unions would be harmed as pressure is put on them to play along with fantasy. Many would even buy into the delusion. Those involved in these unions would be harmed in the most direct way. For society to pretend that they are married would confirm them in a fantasy as well as in a dangerous lifestyle that jeopardizes their health and well-being through a host of medical and moral problems. Redefining marriage to include same-sex couples would lead to even further distortions of marriage. If two people of the same sex can be married, then there is no logical reason why other unions are not possible as well. Polygamous unions with multiple spouses of any combination of sexes would follow, or could follow. Adult-child unions would be up for discussion. There is the related question of non-sexual unions, elderly friends, college roommates, etc. If two people of the same sex can marry to obtain the legal benefits of marriage, then on what grounds would these people be denied them? Applying the term marriage to unions other than those of a man and a woman ends up robbing marriage of meaning. The logical end point of marriage redefinition would have to be recognizing unions of infinitely variable combinations of persons as marriages. Otherwise, you would be discriminating against some combinations. When that happens, marriage, having become whatever you want it to be, has lost all meaning. With divorce rampant, marriage and birth rates dropping, and single parenthood on the rise, adding the level of delusional thinking needed to pretend that homosexual unions are marriages would only harm marriage, the family, and the society even further. Goodbye freedoms of speech and religion. If the idea of homosexual marriage were enshrined in law, people across the land would be forced to play a game of pretend. This would damage their civil rights, particularly their freedom of speech and freedom of religion. The mandatory game of pretend would begin with government workers forced to conduct same-sex wedding ceremonies, to handle the marriage records, and to process the governmental benefits. The game would extend to every industry that does business with families: medicine, insurance, housing, banking, retail, entertainment, education. Workers in each of these fields would be required to play the game. Education in particular would come under even more pressure to support the homosexual agenda, with schools requiring teachers across the country, regardless of their personal beliefs, to portray homosexual behavior in a positive light to school children, and to portray homosexual unions as real marriages. The rights of parents to protect their children from this would be overturned, and many would feel helpless as their children were being indoctrinated with a false understanding of human sexuality. Ultimately, everyone in society will be affected, and any public disapproval or disagreement with homosexuality and homosexual marriage would be treated as hate speech. From there would be a small step to treating opposition to homosexuality as a hate crime. In fact, we already are far down this road. Homosexual activists throughout the United States and in other countries are aggressively using the courts to crush any disagreement with or dissent from their agenda. Business owners who have refused to provide services to homosexual couples have been sued. When the machinery of the law isn't available, homosexual activists have sought to crush disagreement through people's employers, convincing corporations to adopt policies that prevent employees from expressing any contrary opinions or altering their behavior in any way around homosexuals. Employees who fail to comply with these policies can be sent for mandatory sensitivity training, can be denied advancement, can be subject to discipline, or can even be fired. The homosexual agenda ultimately wishes to crush all opposition and disagreement, and that includes muzzling the church and religious ministries. Already in Europe and Canada, Catholic priests and Protestant ministers have been brought to trial for simply expressing their faith's teaching regarding homosexuality and marriage, trying to remove freedom of speech and freedom of beliefs. There will no longer be democracy, if there is any democracy at the moment anyway. What is driving all this? For years, homosexual activists claimed they were merely seeking tolerance, but now their true aims and their own intolerance have been revealed. They cannot tolerate any disagreement with or disapproval of their lifestyle. That is why they are using government and corporate policies as weapons to crush their critics. What they are interested in is not tolerance, but gaining society's approval for their behavior. That is why achieving legal recognition of their unions as marriages is so important. It is not because of the law provides certain benefits to married couples, such as inheritance rights or ability to make medical decisions when a member of the household is incapacitated. The law already has provisions that would allow homosexuals to achieve those things. And in some places there are civil unions or domestic partnerships that provide the same legal benefits as marriage, but without the name. But even that is not enough. Homosexual activists on legal recognition of their unions as marriage itself. Why? It is not about the legal benefits of marriage. It is about approval. The reason is that the activists know deep down that their behavior is disordered. Two men or two women are not designed to go together the way a man and a woman are. To compensate for this innate awareness that homosexual behavior is disordered, Homosexual activists seek the approval of others to reassure themselves that their own behavior is morally right. That's why obtaining legal recognitions of their unions as marriages is so important to them, and why nothing else will do. Even if they were to obtain this goal, the problem would remain because the reality remains the same. Homosexual behavior is still wrong. Homosexual unions are still not marriages, and it would only be playing games with words to pretend otherwise. Thus, the nagging sense that their behavior is wrong would still be there, which raises an important question. How can we show true compassion for those with same-sex attraction? Sometimes homosexual activists accuse those who disagree with them of hate, or they may accuse others of irrational fear, of being homophobic. While some individuals may hate or fear homosexuals, these allegations are a dodge. Merely disagreeing with homosexuality or promoting the truth about men and women does not involve either hate or fear. The charges are still out there though, and it is important to counter them by showing compassion for those with same-sex attraction. This means more than being warm and understanding. It means being honest with them and helping them see through the fantasies that homosexual activists encourage. They need to recognize that homosexual marriage cannot exist because of the very nature of marriage, and that there are no substitutes for marriage. Civil unions or domestic partnerships are not legitimate solutions. Such unions create the same problems and confusion in society, just to a somewhat lesser degree, and they are not intended as stopping point, but as a stepping stones towards the fantasy of homosexual marriage. Finally, homosexual behavior must be recognized for what it is: a distortion of the way human sexuality is meant to work. In this, it is not alone. There are many other distortions, including pornography, prostitution, and adultery. People with same-sex attraction are suffering a particular form of temptation, but everyone suffers from temptation. We are all tempted to do things we should not, and we must all be clear-eyed about this and resist temptation. People who have same-sex attraction have the same inherent dignity as other human beings, and they must be treated with respect. So much respect that we are honest with them and do not encourage the fantasies promoted by homosexual activists. Contrary to the activists' claims, it is not unfair to deny homosexual unions legal recognition as marriages. On the contrary, it would be unfair to create the legal fiction of them being marriages. That would only mislead people, including the very ones involved in such unions. True love and compassion would encourage people with same-sex attraction to seek healing and growth, not to confirm them in a dangerous and disordered lifestyle. This is not a religious issue. Sometimes homosexual activists claim that recognizing marriage as the union of a man and woman amounts to imposing a religion on them. This is not true. Nothing in our argument to this point has been based on religion. We have mentioned that giving legal recognition to homosexual unions would diminish religious freedom, but that's not a religious claim. It is a legal and political fact. Our case against redefining marriage is not based on religious claims, but on human nature. The union of man and woman is simply different than the union of two women or two men. That is something that has been obvious to all people in all times and cultures. Even in cultures such as ancient Greece, where homosexuality was widely practiced, it was always recognized that union of a man and woman is different. Consequently, these societies do not pretend that two people of the same sex could be married. In particular, the connection between marriage and procreation was universally recognized. Marriage thus predates Christianity. It predates Judaism. It predates all of historical religions. It has been with mankind for its entire history. The imposing a religion argument is just a dodge. It doesn't impose anyone's religion to continue to recognize a basic fact of human nature. That is why proposals to divide marriage into civil and religious unions, or to get the government out of the business of recognizing marriages altogether, don't work. Human nature is still the same. The union of a man and woman is still different than any other union, and completely apart from any religious considerations, it is in society's interest to recognize, promote, and protect marriages.